Laser engraving leather. It's not as simple as it seems to get yourself beautiful looking laser engraving pieces of leather like this. There's a few tips and tricks that you need to know, and it is a little bit of an art form. So today we're going to look at 5 key tips that you need to know if you want to laser engrave your leather products and do a really good job of it. If you're new here, my name is Sarah. I'm a leather worker and a laser engraver. So I specialise in custom made traditional leather work, and I do custom laser engraving. So custom laser engraving is an aspect that brings a lot of attention to my business. A lot of people are really interested in it, and it provides a personal kind of touch for customers that they really do love. So today we're going to get into it, look at our 5 tips and what you need to know if you want to laser engrave leather pieces like this. Okay, so the first thing to consider to get great laser engraving results when you're laser engraving leather is your leather choice. I only use vegetable tanned leather. A chrome tanned leather just doesn't work. One reason is just the amount of chemicals and things that are in the leather and the way that it's been treated afterwards. I've tried it before. It gets a very, very shallow engraving. You don't get a nice lovely deep engraving. The second thing that you don't want to be engraving chrome tan leather is because of the chemicals and the fumes. Even if you've got your engraver in a extraction box and you're got an exhaust going somewhere else, those fumes are still going somewhere. It may not be your backyard, but it might be going into your neighbour's backyard. So do think about those fumes. So the fumes aren't any good. But yeah, just in terms of quality as well, you want to go vegetable tanned. I have tried a pre-dyed. Pre-dyed vegetable tan doesn't work as well, but it's still okay. So I tend to dye all of my leathers myself. And with that, I have a lot of control over the type of dye that I use as well. I try and keep things as low kind of chemical and as low toxins as possible. So I always go for a water-based dye. So I have great success with that, a water-based dye with a little bit of neat's foot oil, and I end up with colours like that. Now, tip number 2 for great laser engraving results is a beeswax solution. So this is what I do before laser engraving, and I do it for one reason in particular. That is so that afterwards I can put an antiquing gel on my laser engraving, and so that basically seals it in and gives it a lovely nice black dark colour. The other reason is that I think it helps prevent the charring. So one big problem with laser engraving is that it will char the surface of the leather a bit. I have no problems with that at all. So I get great results, as you'll see soon. And I think it is because of the beeswax. So this beeswax here is just a homemade mix. It's 50% beeswax and 50% olive oil. So it's a really hard mix. I'll show you in a moment that I just put a thick layer. I put it over the whole surface. It will be thick. I'll go and I'll laser engrave it, and then I will buff it all off. So most of the beeswax comes off. Some of it will stay there and seal the leather a bit, which is absolutely fine as well. So that is tip number 2. Always use beeswax. Okay, so we apply beeswax to the entire surface. Scoop it out with a spoon. We've got a hard beeswax there. The warmth of your fingers will help it soften and rub into your leather. So do it over the entire surface. If you just do it in your engraving spot, you'll get discoloration in that area only. Not massive discoloration, but it's enough to certainly annoy you. To engrave, we'll do it just a little bit thicker, quite a thick layer for now, and we'll rub it and buff it all off as soon as we've got the engraving done. Now, before we move on to our laser engraving, I'm going to have a quick chat about how we actually line up the engraving so it turns out perfectly exactly where you want it on your piece of leather. So where we will start, I basically have templates for everything on my Lightburn. So my laser software that I use is Lightburn. I'll have a template for everything on there. That template I use to cut ply templates for cutting out my leather, which is one useful trick. But I also use it on every design that I do. I can line up my engraving exactly where I want it. And so then I will go to my laser and I'll set the outline of that template on a really low setting. And I'll put a piece of card underneath and I will burn the outline onto the card. Then basically you can line up your piece of leather on top of that card and the outline that you've lasered on, and you can line it up perfectly, so you can know that your piece of leather is exactly where you want it, and when you hit the engraving to go, or the laser to go and start engraving, it'll be in the perfect spot. So that there revolutionised my whole laser engraving business, and when it came to doing my leather work, it just made it much quicker, much easier to actually just get it correct every single time. So we'll move on to that now. That's point number 3 and is very useful. Okay, I'll just show you my setup on my laser now. So you can see my laser bed. I've got a piece of manila folder taped down. You can see I do quite a few ones on the same spot, so you can see the lines from previous ones. Sorry, the lighting in my laser cave is terrible. I just can't do too much about that. So you can see these are all lines from past templates that I've burnt on there really lightly. So that burning I do at a speed of 20,000, and I will do at a power of about 50%. So that's just to get a really light line on your card. Okay, so you can see that I've just lightly burnt my line, and now I know exactly where I want my template to go. So that's my outline of my leather, and I line it up perfectly. And if I line it up perfectly well, then I know it's going to stay there. This one does stick up a little bit at the corners, so I'll put a light piece of masking tape on the corners of this just to hold it in place. Now, point number 4, the appropriate power settings on your laser. Don't be too greedy with your power. If you go too high in power, then you might actually start getting that charring and burning on your leather. I never have that issue, but what I tend to do is go a lower power and more passes. So on my light burn, it will vary because everyone's obviously got different lasers, but I've got an Auto Laser Master 3, a 20 watt, and what I do for that, I set my power about in the middle. So I'll always set the speed of mine at 12,000 and the power at 70%, and always do 2 passes when I'm engraving my leather. That works for me. So what you'll have to do for yourself is, when your own machine, is basically do trial runs. But always remember, lower power, more passes, then you'll get less charring. You shouldn't get any trouble with charring at all if you follow these rules. Okay, so that brings us to point number 5. So now that we have engraved it, you can see that it's not actually very dark. So what we want to do now is get some antiquing finish or antiquing gel and dye our engraving. So this is going to make it last a lot longer, and it's going to help. We're going to seal it in afterwards as well. So if you're selling stuff to people, you know that this engraving is going to last forever. So to do that, you will need your antiquing finish, a sponge, and basically we just do it like we're antiquing anything else. The beeswax on the leather will protect the leather from soaking up any dye, so the dye will only go into the engraving. So you take a big dollop of antiquing and just apply it to your engraving there. Rub it in lightly with a sponge. Okay, so there's no massive rush to get this off. You can leave it a couple of minutes. Then you get a cloth and wipe it off nice and hard. There we go. So the beeswax will pick up any spare dye around the edges. So it's kind of hard to see because the lighting on this darker leather is hard to see, especially when you've beeswaxed it. But you can see that it's come up nice and clean. I'm just going to buff off all the excess beeswax around it now. Now the final step, once you've antiqued it and it's nice and dark, particularly for these open looking kind of engravings like this, it will rub on stuff and that antiquing dye will rub off. So you need to seal it with something. I'm going to use Pro Resist for this one because I have Pro Resist on hand. It's basically very similar to Resolene. So Resolene would be the ideal. I just use Pro Resist because it's for sealing my engravings. I don't use it otherwise for anything else. So I only seal my actual leather with Snow Seal. but the engravings themselves I will seal with an acrylic just to make sure I know that it's going to last a long time. So we'll do a couple of coatings with that. So I use a paintbrush where I've got a nice fine tip, and I'll paint my Resin or Pro Resist onto that. Obviously things that are writing like this and very small, I don't worry about those. If I can get my paintbrush in there nice and cleanly, then I will do it. Otherwise, the risk of it actually rubbing off badly isn't, it's pretty unlikely that anything's going to get down and rub that dye off too much. So I'll just seal that with my snow seal, will be fine. So the lighting's particularly hard to see, but you kind of get the point as to what's happening here. You just paint it in very, very finely. It's a lovely kind of milky colour. So you'll do one coat, let it dry, do another coat of Pro Resist, and then it is done. And there we have it, so all finished. So this here is going to get made into a fly fishing case where I basically stitch a wool lining onto the back of this one, so it turns out really neat. So this isn't the final product, it's still a work in progress at the moment. But certainly you can see what the laser engraving is like. So, now if you found this video useful and you found these tips and tricks useful, then please do subscribe. There will be a lot more coming. This is a relatively new channel, but I plan to teach everything I know about traditional leather work and laser engraving along the way as well. So please do join me, hit the subscribe, and thank you for watching.